Hi, everyone. My name is Jim. I am a senior technology consultant with Dean Dorton working in Sage Intacct space. This is a session, as Yelena said, that I had presented at Sage Intacct's Advantage Conference last year in October, and it was really popular. People get a lot of good takeaways from it. This is a session on Sage Intacct Smart Rules and Smart Events, and it's a session for anybody at any level, so you'll learn something regardless of whether you've used them before or not. You'll find that during this session, I like to refer to a lot of real-life examples, and I'll be doing a fair bit of demo in the product because I'm not a fan of just theory. I want to show you something that you can actually use and put into practice. So with that, a list of objectives for today. At the end of this session, you should be able to do these four things. You should be able to identify when you use smart rules versus smart events, explain how to enforce data validation using smart rules, understand conditional smart rules to make your data validation more dynamic, and review the smart event jobs log to check the smart events queued in history. So the first thing I want to do is just do a little poll because now more than ever, everybody is kind of literally quarantined, and it's nice to get a little bit of interaction. So we're going to do a polling exercise here. We don't keep track of any information for marketing or subscription purposes. This is purely just for this session. So if you can please, with your phone, text all lowercase Dean Dorton, all one word, to 22333. Or if you don't want to use your phone in a web browser, you can go to this website, www.pollev.com, type Dean Dorton, all lowercase, and select join. And that will allow you to join our polling software. And then for each question, you're going to just send the letter as your response. So I'll wait like 30 seconds or so that everyone has time to do that and has this information up on screen. Okay, so we are going to move into our questions. First question we have for you is, what industry are you in? So please text the letter that most closely corresponds with your industry. A for professional services, B for nonprofit, C equine, D healthcare, E SaaS, and F other. Okay, so we have still coming in, good. It looks like about a third of the group is in the other category, so not something represented here, and then we have a pretty good split between everything except equine, which is okay. Good, we're going to move on to the next question. What is your role with your organization? So I tried to divide this kind of into the different levels that you may be working at, and then of course there's the other catch-all. Okay, good split. More than half the crowd is senior accountant or above. This is a very good webinar for you folks. You'll find that when you start to have permissions within your Intacct environment to do anything kind of at an admin level, that's when you're able to administer a lot of these smart rules and smart events and be able to start putting some controls in place around the processes that you have. Okay, how long have you been using Sage Intacct? Another good mix. Looks like we have a fair amount of people who've been on it for more than 3 years, so it could be that you haven't had a chance to get into this functionality yet, or someone has been doing it for you and you're looking to take a little bit more ownership of it. And then the less than 1 year, I'm sure many of you haven't had a chance to get deep into this, so that's great. And then for those of you in the middle, you could be in either boat as well. Okay, and then lastly, how familiar are you with smart rules and smart events? I'm not sure why this one already has responses, but please feel free to record your responses. Okay, this is good. So no one, interestingly, falls into the top category where you use write, maintain them actively yourself, which is great because you will get a lot out of this webinar for tools to start to be able to do that. And I think most of you are really falling in the middle categories where either somebody else built them for you or you've tried, but you need a little bit more help. So that's a great place to be. Again, it's a little bit skewed because somehow there were answers on here before. All right, so we're going to first go into an analysis of smart rules versus smart events. What is each one? When do you use each one? What are the differences between them? Because they are two very different and very powerful things. So smart rules are conditions that are going to generate a message. So those are designed to either warn someone that something might be wrong or flat out stop them from performing an action. Smart events are taking an action when a condition is met. So smart event, think of it as more of a trigger. It can do things like send an email when a certain thing occurs. It can post information to an HTTP site, perform an internal API call, or write information to a log. So before I was a Intacct implementation consultant, I was a controller using Intacct as a client. So I use both of these extensively, and I use both of them for different reasons. I would use smart rules a lot of times to stop people from doing things that I had constantly told them not to do, and they did anyway. So, for example, don't code the transaction using this GL account in this department, and they did it. So after a while, I got tired of making reclasses, found out about smart rules, and just made it impossible for that to happen. And then smart events, a lot of times the VP of finance would want to look at any invoice before it got sent to a client. So I was able to create a smart event that automatically just emailed him any invoice, a copy of that invoice that was created so that he could look at that. Those are two very high level examples. So there's certain access levels you need to be able to work with smart rules and smart events. In terms of the access levels, you need to be a business user in Sage Intacct, so this is not functionality that an employee user can interact with. And you need to have limited or full admin permissions to perform the activities that we're going to go over. In terms of what you need to be subscribed to in Sage Intacct, you can do what we're talking about with just the core, so AR, AP, GL, and so forth. There's no fancy or extra subscription level that you need to be able to do this. You just turn on either platform services or customization services in your Intacct environment. From a permissions perspective, you'll need to have the appropriate permissions in the company module and in platform services or customization, and you do need to be either a limited or a full admin. In the company module, we're looking for you to have permission to list and view smart event jobs. And in platform or customization services, I recommend that you just have permissions to do everything in there. There's not a lot of permissions in there anyway. It's easiest to just kind of turn them on. Okay, so this is just a screenshot of what your subscriptions would look like. So whether you have customization or platform, they pretty much do the same thing for the activities that we're going to be talking about today. Just make sure it's turned on. Okay, now we're going to do a deeper dive into smart rules. After we get through this section, there's going to be the first bit of demo. So smart rules are conditions to generate an error message, and you have examples of what that can look like in the screenshot here. So in the left side of the slide, we see a warning. The user can bypass that. So a warning is basically if you want someone to think about what they're doing, but still have the ability to do it anyway, because there could be a reason it might be right. Then you'd set up your smart rule as a warning. which means that somebody performs an action, an error message pops up on the screen, and they have this bit in red that says repeat your action to ignore the warning. That means that they can do it, as opposed to an error, which is a full stop. So you see on the right-hand side of the screen, the error is going to be a message that comes up, and until the user corrects whatever is wrong, they're not going to be able to carry out the action that they're trying to do. So an example of this is when I was a controller, we had a lot of projects. We were a project-heavy organization, and the VP of Finance did not want any expense transactions being posted if they were related to a project to the operating expenses section. They wanted all the expenses to be posted to the cost of goods sold section. So what I did was I wrote a smart rule here, which if anybody tried to post a transaction and they used GL accounts inside the cost of goods sold range and they were tagging a project, they would immediately get an error message like the one on the screen. And it says something like, if the project is staffed in-house, then you can't use this GL account. Please use a different GL account or talk to your admin if you think that something is wrong. As opposed to, before you have the smart rule, every time someone codes something wrong, you have to hope that you catch it and fix it. Or what I really had to do was I would have to run a P&L by project, and I would have to look at every single project column and identify where things were misposted, and then I would have to go in and I would have to reclassify the transactions. Sometimes, because we happen to be in a global consolidation environment, that meant that I had to make a bunch of journal entries because I couldn't click reclassify when something was paid. So it's much easier to have this preemptive review and stopping things from being wrong than it is to have to go back and spend the time reviewing and fixing it later. So there's 3 steps to create a smart rule. It's a wizard that walks you through. So it's not like it's built with any kind of code. Everything in Intacct, as you know, is for the most part driven by menu and drop downs and clicking next and things like that. So step 1 is you choose which object you want to add your smart rule on. So there's a long list of objects that are available. Just don't assume that you can build a smart rule on anything that's in the system, because there are certain fields or objects that will not be available. So always check and reference this dropdown before you assume that you can build a rule. Most of the time you're going to be fine, but just don't get yourself into a situation where you're promising you can create something, but you actually can't. Step 2 is select the rule properties. So in this dropdown up top, you see the type is error. The type can also be warning. So you can choose whether it's error or warning, and obviously error will stop you, warning will let you potentially slide. And then in the event section, you choose when do you want this rule to fire. So if you want it to fire whenever something is added, then you choose add. If you want it to fire whenever something is edited or updated, Intacct refers to that as set. So you would put set in the right-hand side as well. The condition section may look a little bit overwhelming at the moment, but when we get into the demo, you'll see how easy it actually is to use. This is very much kind of like Excel formulas and if-then statements in a lot of cases, where you can just say, if this is true, then this is what I want to happen. If it's not, then this is what I want to happen. It's very easy to work with, especially for people who are used to working in Excel, which is probably everyone in a finance and accounting role. And then lastly, you have an error message, which is, what is the error message that's going to pop up when the user does something wrong? I always make these error messages as specific and as informative as possible so that they know exactly what they did wrong and how to fix it. Last, and this is the easiest step, you just assign the smart rule a unique ID and you put in a description of what it does. The description is helpful because when you look back on the rule and you want to figure out why you built it or what it's for, that description is definitely going to be a good reminder for you. Or it's going to be good context for somebody else who didn't build it and needs to figure out what the intent was behind that. Okay, so we're going to go into a demo for smart rules here. So here we have an Intacct environment where I'm entering AP bills. I've turned on the smart rule to stop someone from coding things wrong. So, for example, if I go to this bill here and I try to notice I'm using right now a cost of goods sold account and I'm tagging it to a project. Well, if I come into this bill and I try to change my coding, so let me try to use a wrong code. As an end user, I can try to change this coding, but when I hit post, here's my error message. And this error message says, project staff in-house cannot use this code. Please use a different code or contact the system administrator. So it's a full stop. There's no need to worry about it slipping through the cracks. It's a computer. It doesn't really have a gray area. It's black and white. So how is this built? Well, inside customization services, you have a menu, and same thing in platform services. I can go to my smart rules here, and I can add them. In this case, I'm going to edit it just so you can see how it's built. Same wizard. So what I did was I chose AP bill detail because I'm trying to stop someone from doing something wrong, in this case, when they're entering an AP bill. Here's the drop-down list. You can scroll through and see there's a wide variety of areas that we can hit with these rules to provide the validation that we're looking for on our data. I can hit next, and it's going to take me to the next step of the wizard. So here I've got my rule type, either error or warning. In this case, I want it to be an error because if it's wrong, I don't want it getting through. I don't want the option of saying, repeat your action and go ahead and do it wrong anyway. That's not what I'm looking for. In my events, I chose an add and set. If I hadn't chosen set, when somebody went back and edited that bill, they could have gone and edited it, changed the coding to the wrong coding, and it would have moved on. So that's why I have set. I don't want it to just protect me from things being wrong when it's initially added. I want to also be protected against somebody going in and making a change to make it wrong somewhere down the line. So I've got add and set. Now here, we're going to talk about kind of the conditional smart rule concept. So here I've got what's called a conditional smart rule, and it functions a lot like an if-then statement in Excel. This question mark here, think of that as the if-then statement inside of Excel. So whatever comes before the question mark is what I'm asking, is this true or not? Then I'm saying, if it is true, here's part one before the colon. So if it's true, and then if it's not true, here's my part two. Now let's break down what is actually inside these commas. Right? So what's inside these commas is what's called kind of a merge field or a field lookup from Intacct. And what we're saying here is, if the project type is staffed in-house, so is that true? If it is, then my account number on the AP bill is not equal to 6135. If it's not, then my account number on the AP bill is equal to itself, which essentially means anything goes. So what this rule accomplishes in this example is, if my project type is staffed in-house, I'm not allowed to use GL account 6135, but I can use any other GL account that I want. That's what this does. And this is exactly the kind of use case that I had as a controller. Now, how do I get these fields and know what to use? Well, it's pretty simple. It used to be a lot harder a year and a half or so ago. But if I want to add a field to this rule for using it in this kind of a condition, I can just go to field lookup here. And I have a list of all the different things that I could want to evaluate. So, and it's got everything that's related as well. So in this case, I want to know is the related project on this bill a staffed in-house project. So I'm going to go down to the project section. I'm going to choose my project type and hit OK. And Intacct is going to give me what that field name is kind of behind the scenes. So we don't have to go look that up anywhere. We don't have to know them. You can just use the field lookup. And using that concept, I was able to create this kind of a statement. Then of course I've written in my error, so my condition here, if this, whenever this condition fires, so if they use 6135, they're going to get this error message. And last but not least, I just gave it a unique ID and put a description of what it does. So that's all there is to building the smart rule. And as you saw when I demoed the AP bill, it fires and stops you from doing things wrong. Now, if I go into that same bill and I change the account to something else, and this is a key component of when you're building these, you always want to test and do all these what if this happens, what if that happens, to make sure you've written your rule correctly. So if I went in and I changed this coding to something else, say I wanted it to be 5130, that's fine. It lets me do that because I don't have any rules that prohibit that. But the minute that I use 6135, we know that that's not allowed and we're going to get the error. Okay, before I move to the smart events section, do we have any questions that have come in so far?
Jim, I haven't seen any, so you're good. But again, guys, if you have any that pop up, put them in and we'll go through them as we go.
Okay, great. Sounds good. So now I'm going to move to the next section, which is talking about smart events. Okay, so now remember, smart events are different than smart rules. Smart rules are a validation tool. Smart events are designed to take an action when something happens. So smart events are based upon a trigger, and then they're going to do something else. There's 4 different actions, as you can see on the slide here. The ones that we're going to talk about in this session are sending an email and performing an internal API call. So the distinction is, obviously, when we talked about smart rules, we were talking about data validation, displaying error messages. Smart events is about doing something. I used the example before where the VP of finance at my past organization would want to see the invoice before it ever went to a customer. Before I started writing smart events, I had to rely on my staff to make sure that they sent that invoice every time. There were plenty of times that didn't happen because they forgot to send it. And it's possible that an invoice could have gone to a customer without the VP of finance saying, yeah, this is okay. So my answer to that, rather than trying to come up with some way to make sure that people did things when they were too busy to remember, is I just set up a smart event, and every time an invoice was created, my VP of finance got the email, he got a PDF copy of the invoice. 100% of the time that worked. You can use an API smart event to do some really creative things in addition to that example. The premise of an API smart event is when this event happens, take data from one place in Sage Intacct and populate it somewhere else. So common applications of this that I've seen that I've actually built for some of you who are on this call are things like having the customer's tax ID number automatically populate onto an invoice when the invoice is posted, taking the vendor's ID number, posting it onto an AP bill. You might also use an API smart event to have certain values auto-populated when a transaction's entered. So for example, if you've got a custom checkbox that should be checked or unchecked on your transaction lines based on something on your customer record, you can have the API smart event update that when the AP or the AR invoice posts. So you don't have to worry about going back in after an invoice is created and putting the customer's tax ID on or putting a PO number on, because we can have smart events find where that data lives in the system, pull it onto the document, and it's there and ready to go when you need to print your invoice. I have a powerful additional example of this from nonprofit organizations that don't have a CRM or formal grants management system, but they wanted to be able to have grants people keep track of all the information for grant audit reporting at the time of transaction entry. The reason that they wanted to do this is because when they got to audit time and they had their auditors there looking for grant information, they needed to have all the information about the grant, such as who is the funder, what is the federal ID number, what type of award is this, and all of that information historically they would have to go back to development, get that information, and the burden became on finance for keeping track of all that data. So we were able to shift that responsibility off of finance and onto the grants people to make sure that they were putting the data in and it was pushing to everywhere that finance needed it to go. So we'll talk about that example in a little bit. I'm going to start with the 4 steps to creating a smart event. So it's a very similar wizard, obviously, because they all live in Intacct. So in smart events, your first step is choosing an object to base your event on. When you choose the object, you think about what is the source transaction that you're basing your trigger off of. So for example, if you want a customer tax ID to pop onto a sales invoice after the sales invoice is posted, then your owner object is your sales invoice. Why? Because that's the transaction that's triggering the event. If there's no sales invoice, there would be nothing for that tax ID to generate onto. So you have to think about where does the chain start, and that's what your owner object is going to be. Second step is kind of identifying when you want this to happen. So again, it's the add set kind of concept. Just a side note, I very rarely see things based on deletion happening. In a lot of cases, we don't want delete to happen. So it's not very common that any kind of rule or event is based on something getting deleted. It doesn't often make sense. So in this case, you can choose in your action dropdown whether you want it to be an HTTP site, logging it, sending an email, or doing an internal API call. And then in the condition section, you can say, I only want this smart event to fire under certain conditions. If you leave the condition section blank, that means that the smart event is always going to fire. So in this case, it would be like anytime an AR invoice is added, we're going to have that smart event fire and do whatever we want it to do. Next section, select deployment options. I'm not sure, this got a little bit out of order, it looks like, but this is actually the last part of it. So your last step is selecting deployment options, and it looks very much the same as a smart rule does, where you give it a unique ID and give a description. Backpedaling a little bit, sorry, the slides are a bit out of order. Step 3 is the important part. This is the beef of the smart event. So in this case, this example is a smart event API call. It's an internal API call, so it stays within your Sage Intacct instance. We're not going to some other system and pulling data. We're pulling data from one place in Sage Intacct to another. But it's incredibly powerful because it reduces the amount of double data entry that you or someone else on the team has to do. You can use it for things like updating master records when a transaction saves, creating sales invoices when a new customer is created, setting a project ID to inactive when the final invoice is issued. The key thing is you're pushing information from one place in Sage Intacct to another. Any of the examples that I just kind of ran through would ordinarily be 2 or 3 or 4 more steps. So if you issued the final invoice, you'd issue it, then you go over to your project module and you would go make that project inactive. What if you wanted to do it all at once with one click? That's what a smart event kind of accomplishes for you. Here, and this is an example of what a smart event looks like. This is, again, not something to be scared of. I am not a developer. I am not an engineer. I'm nothing like that. And I write these and have written these for a long time. And I kind of self-taught it. So it's very easy to do. Smart Event Jobs Queue. This was added in 2019 release 2. And the Smart Event Jobs Queue basically lets you see what's going on with any smart events that are happening in your system. So you can see if the smart event has succeeded or failed. You can see a queue of smart events that are processing and haven't yet happened. And you can also view the failures to see an error message so you can troubleshoot and resolve your smart event. It's a really useful feature, particularly when you're working with smart event API calls. The reason that I call this out and put this in here is that it's a permissionable thing. So just make sure that you go and review the permissions on your roles or your users and ensure that you do have access to the smart event jobs list if you need to, because that's how you're going to be able to get this valuable feedback about what's going on. There's one other thing when you're creating a smart event. particularly Smart Event API call, there's this little checkbox that says Synchronous Smart Event. This came out in 2018, release 4. And basically the background on this is that prior to 2018 release 4, all smart events were what is referred to as asynchronous, which means that it's very possible for them to have occurred in parallel and out of order. Now, the problem with this is, what if you want one smart event to create a sales invoice and another smart event to update that same invoice? Well, if you don't have control over the order that your smart events are firing in, you would have gotten errors, things wouldn't have worked. So to prevent that, we have this synchronous smart event concept, which allows us to make sure that the smart event is tied to the action that we need it to be tied to. So for example, if we want a smart event to update a sales invoice, if we make it synchronous, that sales invoice is not going to post unless the smart event fires. So it ensures that the triggering action is tied to the success or failure. It also allows us to be able to define the order in which things happen, so that if we need one thing to happen before the next, we can make that happen with synchronous smart events. It does add a little bit of a level of complexity, but I can't really think of many good uses where you wouldn't make a smart event synchronous, because being able to control that order is just so powerful and so valuable. Just a note, so when you were looking at that API slide, you might have thought, how did he figure out how to write all of that? I didn't create it from scratch. I didn't dream it up. I have no engineering or developer background. The way that I did it is because Sage Intacct has really good resources for working with the API. They're ranging from some really great bones that you can use to build your own calls to turnkey API calls that you can copy and paste and use for your own purposes. So you can look at the developer website, and I've included a link to it in this deck, and it has all the pre-built calls that you need to use for where you fill in your data points. And it also has a full collection for a tool called Postman, which you can use to test your API calls. So there's links to this in the slide deck. The information is there. It's really easy to kind of take and use for your own purposes. They've made it as transparent as possible. So I'm going to go through a demo of an API call, and then I'm going to show you how we can kind of combine all of these concepts together, and we can use the Smart Event API call to update data that we need to update, and then also use the Smart Rule to validate whether we filled out information properly or not, all in the kind of the same transaction. So let's take a look at, I'm going to hop into that nonprofit use case that I was alluding to before. So as I said, the concept behind the Smart Event API call is take data that lives in one place and stick it in another place. The use case that I'm about to show you came out of a brainstorming conversation when I was working with a client here at Dean Dorton. They're a nonprofit. They have some grant activity, but grants is not really the biggest or most significant part of their business. And this is not just a nonprofit specific example, by the way. This applies to anyone who may have any kind of sales activities or proposals out there that they want to track. So I've worked in several nonprofits where grants is not the biggest thing, but they still have a few. And even though this client was not so heavily focused on grant, they still did have a department that worked with grants and was trying to grow the grants piece of their organization. And they were asking for a tool to help them manage that process better, because what they wanted to do was to be able to keep track of the status of their applications and to capture the information that they needed if a grant was awarded. They didn't want to go the route of purchasing and integrating a separate grants management system or using a CRM. It was just overkill for them. But at the same time, they wanted to be able to track that info and make sure that the grants people were providing it instead of finance having to go dig for it. So what I did was I created a workflow for them inside Sage Intacct that does just that. And it's using core functionality that everybody has access to. It's inside of order entry, and it's using order entry transaction definitions and Smart Event API calls to let the grants person keep track of grant applications from inception to completion, and provide all the information that finance needs for federal grants. And it's all using a single workflow that's built in order entry. So what this did for this client is it broke down the traditional silos where everybody used to think that it was all finance's job to keep track of this stuff. And it made the process of them having audit ready information more collaborative. So as we talk through this, just think about this, how we can apply this concept and how you may be able to apply this concept to a scenario that you might have. Again, the end goal is take information from one place, put it in another. This is transforming what could have been multiple data points in multiple places of data entry into a single source of truth. So in this demo, I configured the smart event to write information off of the grant application onto a project. Let's just peek behind the scenes at how we build the smart event. So again, it's inside customization or platform. And we go to our smart events menu. And here I have two smart events that I did. I'm going to show you the update grant details one first. So this is a smart event that's happening on an order entry transaction, and it's happening from a notice of award document, or maybe a successful sales order if it's not nonprofit world. Same concept. It's an API, so it's the action that it's going to take is perform an internal API call, and I want this to happen anytime that the notice of award is added. And here we're into the meat of it. So this is an update call. It's written in XML, but again, this is all available kind of out of the box from Intacct. They've got a good record of things like this on their developer site. But basically, I'm saying I want you to update. So you see update and end update. Everything that has an open also has to have a close, is one of the key concepts. So we're saying we want to update. What do we want to update? Well, we want a project. And then we have to tell Intacct, what is that project ID? So rather than me having to figure that out, Intacct figures that out. So the project ID is the project ID used on this document. Again, I did not dream that up or figure that out myself. If I go to my field lookup and I tell Intacct, I want you to update the project ID that is on this document, I can look through my fields here and find my project ID. And it's somewhere in here. Project ID. And I'm going to hit OK. And see, it brings up the field name. So when I know the things that I need to update, I then can fill in what is that data using the field lookup. So Intacct is allowing me to update all these pieces of information, the project ID, some custom fields that I had added for who's the agency that is giving this grant, what is the program name, what is the CFDA or ID number, what is any other ID number, and what is the contract amount. All of this is going to be filled in on the order entry transaction, and it's going to push over to the project records, which eliminates double entry. And then my last step is provide a unique ID and give it a description. So with that in place, then what's going to happen is the client's grant person can go in and they can go in and do a grant application submission. So here, for example, we have an order entry screen, which is using the quote flow of order entry, and they're putting in, they've applied for a grant to a customer. We've got an ID number to track that grant. If we take a look at this ID number right now, by the way, you will notice it is a project. And if I go to the additional info section, there's a section down here for contract amount, right? There's a section for all these document numbers. And then there's this grant info tab, which is a custom tab that I created. And it's got the agency, funded program name, CFDA, other ID. Well, all this stuff is blank. And when I get the grant, I don't want to have to go and remember to put all this on the project so that I can use it in reporting. So what I'm going to do is my grants person is going to post this. That's great. And I'm going to indicate, is this a federal grant or not? So in this case, yeah, it's a federal grant that I'm applying for. So let me post this. And now when I've gotten the award, all I have to do as the grants person is convert. So I'm going to say, great, I got it. I want to convert this to a notice of award. And notice there's now a new tab on my grant, on my notice of award document rather, where I have to fill in the grant details. My federal grant is yes. Now remember we have the concept of a conditional SMART rule before, where if something, I needed to fill something out, it's not going to let me move forward. Well, when I post this or try to post it as the grants person, if I'm in a rush, I'm going to get this error where it says, if the project is a federal grant, please complete the grant details tab. In other words, you need to give me that info because we need it for audit, and I don't want to have to come chasing you for it when it's audit time. So I'm going to go to the grant details tab and take all of this information that is sitting in front of me on the notice of award that I have from the funder. So I can pick who's funding it, what is my funded program name, what is my CFDA or government identification number, what is my any other ID that there may be, and how much did they give me. So when I do all of that and I post it, I've recorded my notice of award, but more importantly, if I come in here and I want to go take a peek at this project, my grant info is there. So all of this information was pushed over by the grants person without them even having to really know what was going on. But it's pushed there so that when we need to create a schedule of federal expenditures, when we need to create any kind of reporting that makes use of this data, it's there and it's ready. And because of the SMART rule, we stopped people from not being able to fill it out if it's a federal grant. So we've combined the concept of SMART rule for data validation with SMART event to push information. And what we effectively have is we've got required information, and that information is going to where we need it to go for reporting. And all of it is happening without human intervention to review and make sure that that is happening. It's just impossible to do it any other way because of the workflow that we've designed. Now, similar concept, what if we wanted to say, when I have a grant that I didn't get, I want the project ID that I was using for that grant to be made inactive because it's no longer relevant. Well, I can do that too. I can say, here's a grant that I didn't get. Notice right now, it's here, it's active. I'm going to actually open up my project list to fully demonstrate what this is going to look like. So it's a project here, P00005, million zeros. What I can do is, instead I can say, I want to convert this grant to a grant rejection. So this is recording the fact that I didn't get this. So it's helpful for analysis purposes because you can see what you got and what you didn't get. And you can do any kind of effectiveness evaluation on either salespeople or grant writers or whoever the case might be to make sure that they're as effective as you need them to be. So now I got this project that ends in 4, and I'm going to post this rejection. So this rejection is posted. I did that as the grants person. Before, it was here in my list. When I reload my page, it is inactive. So the data cleanup work that someone else would otherwise have to do has been taken away because we've automated that with the SMART event. So that is my deck. Do we have any questions? I'm going to open up my presentation again.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Jim.
Sure.
I did have a couple come through. Someone asked, are there standard rules to choose from?
There are not standard rules to choose from because the idea is that you're tailoring it to whatever your business case is. So this is it's fully built by you on a case by case basis. But there are a lot of ideas in the Intacct help, for example. So for those of you who may not have worked with Intacct help a lot, if you're in customization or platform services and you go to Smart Rules, you always have help and support inside Intacct. And you can go to help on this page. That's my favorite way to access help in Intacct because it takes you to help in the context of the page that you're on. And in the help section, it has further information about how you do a smart rule. And it may also have some examples of what you can do with a smart rule, right? So for example, they have one here that's like if the customer's address is outside the United States, there has to be prepayment, or there has to be a date on the invoice. So they have examples of smart rules kind of peppered throughout the help article, and also really good, just step-by-step guidance, even deeper than I went on our call, because obviously this is a short session, of how you can build a smart rule. So you can get to that, and the help articles on these topics are really fantastic for both smart rules and smart events.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, that kind of answered. Someone else had asked too if we could provide like a list of smart rules and events that have been written for other companies, but I'm wondering if they could find maybe some more examples on this page.
Yeah, there's good kind of starting place examples on the help center. And the other concept behind smart rules and smart events is it's such an open book because it was intentionally built that way so that you can tailor your business logic. So what you have to think about, what are the kinds of things that you want people to do as a process. So for example, do you want them to not code things with certain departments if they're using a certain account? Do you want a certain field to always be filled in? So when someone is creating a vendor, do we want to make sure that somebody's always specifying a term? We've created rules for that. We sometimes created rules that if you're setting up items in order entry or in purchasing, you always have to fill in the item GL group. So smart rules are really useful for making sure that somebody does something that they commonly may forget to do or overlook.
Mhm.
And then smart events are things like push things to another place, kind of like I showed, or send an email to someone whenever something happens. So for smart events, I've had a lot of people who want to get an email anytime an AP or AR invoice is posted. I have people who want to get an email anytime a customer's created or an email anytime a vendor's created. All those things can happen in smart events.
Okay. Awesome. And then this is a good question too. Can you create a rule for a range of accounts or is it specific per account?
You can do it for a range of accounts, but what I like to do is make it as dynamic as possible. So rather than sticking a range in there, you can do something like create a custom field on the GL account that says, you know, purpose or something like that. So for example, I'll walk through that really quick on screen so we have a little bit of time. So what I would do is I'd add a custom field, for example, on my GL account, and I would make it a drop down, and I would call it something like GL account purpose. And maybe I would say that it's used for direct expenses or indirect expenses. And then what I can do is, as I'm creating a GL account, and this makes it more dynamic so that you don't have to go and update your smart rule every time that you add a new GL account. So I might say here, my GL account purpose for this is direct. My GL account purpose for some other account may be indirect. And then if you're inside your smart rule, so if I go back to customization services, I'm in my smart rule. And let me take this staffed in-house example that I started with and duplicate it. And maybe now what I say instead is, um, if my project type is staffed in-house, then I'm going to pull the field that I just created. So for example, my field lookup, I'm going to look at my related GL account, and I'm going to say that my GL account purpose, so I'm going to replace, copy this, stick this in here, and I'm going to say if it's staffed in-house, then my GL account purpose is not equal to indirect. Right? So I've used that now dynamically so that I don't have to sit there and type in a bunch of different, you can't use this, you can't use that. I'm flagging it, of course, on the screen that I left, but I'm flagging it on the GL account level using this field. So now when I'm creating the GL account, I have to specify a purpose. Maybe I even make this a required field. And that way I can specify when I can and cannot use that more dynamically. Do we have any others?
Nope, that's all that came in. So I think we're good. Are you able, yeah, to go to that last slide, Jim, just in
Yeah,
case anybody,
sure.
yeah, as always, guys, if any questions come up, please feel free to contact our support team and someone can get back to you. And then next month in May will be a, big webinar as release 2 of Sage Intacct is coming out for 2020. So be on the lookout for updates and emails on that webinar. So Jim, I appreciate your time and I hope everyone is staying safe and healthy and we'll talk to you guys soon.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.